This is Al Jazeera.
And live from Studio 14 here at Al Jazeera headquarters in Doha, I'm Kamal Santamaria. Welcome to the News Grid. It's our planet and our future, so we're devoting the whole broadcast to it. As the United States confirms its withdrawal from the Paris Climate Accord and the world reacts with almost universal condemnation, China and the EU decide to take the lead at a meeting in Brussels. But that's just the politics. Does the deal itself fall apart without the United States? We'll be going around the world to the places where climate change is already affecting lives and livelihoods to see how they're reacting and if their efforts will be worth it. And what of Donald Trump's claims that pulling out of Paris is in the interests of the American economy? Do the people, the states, the businesses agree with him? Because we know Trump wants America first. Just what will be the cost?
Hashtag Paris Agreement and withdraw are both trending worldwide, with millions joining in both for and against Trump's latest climate move. We want to hear from you too. I'm Leah Harding. Connect with us with the hashtag AJNewsGrid.
You're with the News Grid, live on air and streaming online through YouTube, Facebook Live and at aljazeera.com. It is literally the story of our lifetime. So we're giving over the entirety of Friday's News Grid to the Paris Climate Accord, the US withdrawal, and the reaction and ramifications therein. We're going to go around the world to Brussels, where China and the EU are stamping their mark on a commitment to combating climate change. To the US, where protesters are out in force, but people are also out of work and banking on Trump's plan to put America first. And to India, where even the most remote communities are finding ways to make even just a little change. But first, the reason we're all talking about this, US President Donald Trump making the announcement in Washington on Thursday.
The United States will withdraw from the Paris Climate Accord Thank you. Thank you. But begin negotiations to re-enter either the Paris Accord or in really entirely new transaction on terms that are fair to the United States, its businesses, its workers, its people, its taxpayers. So we're getting out.
Well, China's Premier Li Keqiang has just been meeting with EU leaders in Brussels, and they agreed to step up their cooperation to reduce global carbon emissions. The world's two major polluters reiterated their commitment to protecting the planet, and they sent the world a message. There will be no backsliding on the Paris deal. The European Council President says the US decision is a big mistake.
Today, China and Europe have demonstrated solidarity with future generations and responsibility for the whole planet. We are convinced that yesterday's decision by the United States to leave the Paris Agreement is a big mistake, bigger than not ratifying the Kyoto Protocol, because Paris is fairer. But the fight against climate change and all the research, innovation and technological progress it will bring will continue, with or without the United States.
So how's everyone else reacted? Because, to be fair, we knew this was coming. It's another election promise which Donald Trump has kept. Nevertheless, the move has been called a disappointment, regrettable, a mistake. Germany's chancellor says the rest of the world will not stop its fight against global warming.
The decision of the United States to pull out of the Paris Agreement is utterly regrettable, and that is me choosing very restrained language. The accord continues to be one of the cornerstones of global cooperation, and this agreement is indispensable to reach the United Nations 2030 Sustainable Development Goals. This is why it is now necessary to turn our attention to the future. This decision must not and will not deter any of us who feel beholden to protect the Earth.
And plenty of other world leaders have condemned America's decision to pull out of the Paris Climate Accord. Andrew Thomas takes us around the world for that.
18 months ago in Paris, there were cheers and tears of joy. There seemed near universal optimism. The world had united behind a global agreement. On Friday, world leaders spoke of a different common sentiment: disappointment.
I do respect this decision, but I do think it is an actual mistake, both for the US and for our planet.
I believe the US President Trump decision completely goes against the wisdom that mankind has developed, so I am deeply disappointed.
It is disappointing. We would prefer the United States to remain part of the agreement.
Canada is deeply disappointed with the US position. The Paris Agreement is a good deal for Canada, and it's a good deal for the world.
In Pacific Island nations, homes regularly flood because of climate change. Fiji's Prime Minister was another to say that Donald Trump's decision was deeply disappointing, especially for vulnerable nations.
So this is a geopolitical issue for America as well as an environmental one. Now, these are countries that are at the forefront of the climate impacts. The rising sea levels are threatening their very existence. And if they feel like they're being thrown under the bus by the Trump administration, they may well turn into the willing embrace of China that wants to expand its influence here.
The United States now joins just two other countries not part of the accord: Nicaragua and Syria. And so far, no other country has suggested it will pull out of Paris too. But environmentalists worry President Trump's decision will lessen their resolve to stick to the spirit of the agreement, as well as their formal commitments. Here in Australia, for example, the government has recently approved a giant new coal mine. Its coal will be mostly exported and burned in China and India, so it won't add much to Australia's emissions, but it will do just as much global damage. One irony is that the Great Barrier Reef, very near the approved new mine, will be one natural wonder to suffer. Over the last 2 years, warming seas have already bleached half the reef of its colour. More warming will make that worse. President Trump promises to make America great again. But in France, where the nationalist view lost out to a more global outlook in recent elections, the new president had this to say.
Because wherever we live, whoever we are, we all share the same responsibility. Make our planet great again.
Andrew Thomas, Al Jazeera, Sydney.
Very pointedly speaking in English there as well, the new French president. Now, on top of all of that reaction, we've got this from the spokesman for the United Nations Secretary General, Antonio Guterres. Not happy about developments, but actually still hopeful the US will be a leader on environmental issues.
The decision by the United States to withdraw from the Paris Agreement on climate change is a major disappointment for global efforts to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and promote international security. The Paris Agreement was adopted by all the world's nations in 2015 because they recognize the immense harm that climate change is already causing and the enormous opportunity that climate action represents. It offers a meaningful yet flexible framework for action by all countries.
Well, it's also interesting to remember, in amongst all this reaction, who was actually on board with the Paris deal, because in short, there is still plenty of support out there, meaning the accord does still have life in it. Have a look at this quick map here. It's from Business Insider magazine. Pretty simple. But as you see here, we get a total of 194 countries which have either ratified the agreement, that is, agreed to it and signed off in their own countries, or at the least signed up to it, I should say, as well. The three not part of it: Syria, Nicaragua, and the United States. It is a pretty exclusive club. Only 3 countries in the world that do not want to be part of this. All right, Asad Rahman with us now, former head of international climate with the environmental group Friends of the Earth. He's now the executive director of War on Want, which is a human rights group fighting against global poverty. Great to have you with us on this special edition of the News Grid. I do appreciate it. So, the deal's not dead, is it? I mean, we obviously have to take a lot of notice of what happens with the United States, but there are signs that there is plenty of life left in it.
Absolutely. The deal, of course, is not dead. Look, the Paris Agreement was weak. It was not robust enough. The pledges in there were going to lead to a warming of at least 3 degrees centigrade and beyond. And the reason for that was because of US pressure. They wanted a weak agreement. They wanted it not to be binding. They wanted it to be determined by individual countries to decide what they want to do. And so the US pledge in that was actually just 1/5 of what they actually needed to do. But the reality is that the rest of the world recognizes the crisis that we face of climate change. Already with just 1 degree warming, as your report shows, impacts are happening all over the world, killer floods and droughts. And people recognise that not only do we need to take on and tackle climate change, but actually that there are huge opportunities, both tackling inequality, both protecting our food systems, and of course creating a better, safer, more equal world. And that can be done. And so Donald Trump's decision today really makes him a climate pariah. He puts the United States well outside of global civil society, global international community. And I think it's a really retrograde step. And it's one that's damaging not only to the poor and the most vulnerable in the rest of the world, but also to US citizens as well. Because of course, they're not immune from climate impacts.
Assad, we're going to be talking more about this. Sorry, I just want to interrupt you. We're going to be talking more about this later in our broadcast, but I want to get your view as well, and that's China. China taking the lead here. I mean, to my eyes, it's actually almost good PR on their part, isn't it? They're the world's biggest polluter, and they're saying, hey, look, we're stepping up. How seriously, I guess, do you see that they are tackling climate change as the world's largest polluter?
Well, look, historically, the United States still remains the greatest producer of greenhouse gas emissions. They're responsible for about 28% of the emissions that are in the atmosphere that cause the climate crisis. China's on about 9% historically. Now, of course, Chinese leadership is really important, and China has actually is doing way more than rich developed countries. If you look at the pledges in the Paris Agreement, they're actually poorer developing countries are doing twice, even 3 times as much as rich developed countries. And that's a really good sign because, of course, that's for both for domestic circumstances because they understand climate impacts are happening, but also because they recognise that the future of the world lies in green technology, lies in investing in renewable energy. Already, even in the United States, for example, there are more people employed in the renewable industry than the coal, gas and oil industry combined. And so what Donald Trump is trying to do is move the world and the United States backwards when actually we need to be moving much forward. And I think China recognises that. And what's really important now is the role of the European Union. The European Union has largely acquiesced to the United States' idea of weakening the agreement simply to contain the United States. Now that the United States has actually decided to step out of the agreement and try and set fire to the agreement, the European Union should now send a very, very strong signal that it will go back to making sure that we have a binding agreement, that it's science-based and it's ambitious and it delivers the cuts that are needed to keep temperatures well below 1.5 degrees centigrade. There is an opportunity to do that. The climate negotiations move to Germany this year, hosted by Fiji, and then again in Poland next year. This is a pivotal moment when countries can review their Paris targets and say, actually, we're going to do even more because they can clearly do much more. The technology is there, the resources are there. What is lacking is the political will. Right. And that's what now the European Union has to demonstrate. China is beginning to show it. China is doing much more, investing in renewable energy. It's the world leader in renewable energy. A football field of solar panels China creates every single day in China. So the technology and the hope does definitely lie with poorer developing countries. Yeah, absolutely.
Assad Rahman, a pleasure talking to you. We thank you for your time. From London, we go to Brussels. Paul Brennan is our correspondent there, where the Chinese Premier has been meeting with those EU leaders to reaffirm their commitment to fighting climate change. Paul, as you may have heard our guest actually saying there, this is not just a big chance for China, big chance for Europe as well to step up and show leadership.
Well, indeed. I mean, China is also looking out for its own strategic country's interest, but it's doing it in a more internationalist way. Its policy is to reach out, and it's been doing that here in Brussels today. There's been an EU-China summit that Donald Tusk, one of the European presidents, described as the most promising EU-China summit in our history. And although we're waiting for the final communique to be issued, the draft communique, which had already been seen, spoke about, for example, stepping up cooperation between the two sides, committing themselves to full implementation of the Paris Climate Agreement. Other issues such as the uncertainty and destabilizing factors are going to be addressed, and the joint statement committing to look at cutting back on fossil fuels, developing more green technology, and raising $100 billion per year by the year 2020 to help poorer developing nations to cut their greenhouse emissions. So China and Europe are using the American decision to put themselves closer together and using President Trump's withdrawal from Paris to put themselves very strongly into Paris.
Thank you, Paul Brennan, live in Brussels for us there. So while we're looking and talking about who's in and who's out and who can carry this forward, let's visit some places around the world which already know all about climate change. Manel Fernandez is in Sri Lanka, where people are, of course, coping with the worst flooding in 14 years. We've been reporting extensively on that. Tanvir Chowdhury's in Kutubida Island in Bangladesh, which was hit by a cyclone 3 days ago. But first, Catherine Soy's on a farm in Machakos County on the outskirts of Nairobi, Kenya.
I have been speaking to many small-scale farmers who solely rely on rain for their farming, and they're very worried because this is the end of the long rain season, and they say the rains have been insufficient. They started late. Wambua there says that if it doesn't rain consecutively for the next 1 week, then he's not going to get much of a yield. There's also a severe drought in the region. Millions of people are facing starvation. Livestock has been wiped out. Many people have died from disease and malnutrition, and this is causing a lot of concern in the region, with climate change experts and government leaders saying that more needs to be done in terms of better strategies to enable some of these very vulnerable farmers and pastoralists cope. And this obviously requires the financial might from countries from the developed world, because after all, Africa is bearing the biggest burden of climate change, even if it is one of the least emitters of carbon emissions.
Here in Sri Lanka, climate change is manifesting itself in extreme weather conditions. Recent years has seen either extreme, either we have crippling drought or it's terrible, terrible flooding, as we saw just last week. The other thing that is also a possibility is that we have different parts of the country seeing both extremes. So Sri Lanka feeling the effects. The agriculture sector has really been badly hit. Just the last couple of months saw up to 1 million people, according to the World Food Programme, affected by drought. Almost 30 to 40% of the paddy harvest in this country taking a hit, being destroyed because of the lack of water. Now, because of this, there's obviously many agricultural households, obviously being a large sort of proportion of this country's population, lots of households facing crippling poverty, unable to pay back loans, unable to sort of meet their commitments. Also, we're seeing rising sea levels in the country. We're seeing the spread of disease, things like dengue, essentially changing the cycle in terms of weather patterns, leading to the increased breeding of mosquitoes. So Sri Lanka very much at the forefront and feeling the effects and hoping desperately that solutions to climate change can be found.
The decision for American pullout is going to be taken very negatively within the policymaker. Bangladesh is taking the major brunt of the climate change, yet it only produces 0.3% of the greenhouse emission. So this is not going to be taken lightly. Someone satirically said that millions of internal refugees, where they're going to go? Trump is not going to take any refugees from Bangladesh. Neither is going to help anyone out financially, yet we have to break the burn in this part of the world. This island, if you look behind me, this coast, I asked a lot of farmers and fishermen here. They said our ancestral homes were just about a mile from here, and now it's eroded all the way here. A lot of people have lost their land. They've moved to urban areas, which is already densely populated. People have lost their fishing ground. They have to go deep sea to find fish because of the rise in temperature and the sea level. And the frequency of cyclone within the last 5 years has significantly increased. It used to be 1 or 2 cyclones a year. Now they get signal about 5, 6 cyclones a year. So this is undoubtedly going to be a very, very sad news for people of countries like Bangladesh, Sri Lanka and Maldives, all across the South Asian countries.
Great stuff there from our correspondents showing you exactly what this story is all about. Now, you've been getting in touch with us. The contact details are coming up on screen right now if you want to, but so many questions coming through. And actually, The most question we're getting here is why and what are the reasons behind Donald Trump's decision? Basically, it's jobs, and we're going to be talking about that. We've got a whole segment later on in this broadcast to talk about it, but plenty of you disagreeing with Donald Trump's decision, some saying it's a great opportunity. Kellyanne on Facebook, it's a great opportunity for other countries to step up and take leadership roles, which is what we're seeing obviously with China and the EU. Mensah watching from Ghana thinks this will go down as one of the biggest mistakes of the United States. But there was, if I just go through, this is a good Facebook comment from Martin, who said, I will never support global control. You don't have to be part of the Paris Climate Accord in order to reduce the emissions in your own country, which is very true. Another thing we will be looking at a little bit later on. So do get in touch with us. That's the WhatsApp number. The hashtag, as always, is AJ Newsgrid. All right, we're zeroing in on the United States itself now, where several states have said they will proceed with, this is what we're saying, their own strategy on climate change, despite President Trump's decision. So far, such comments have been made by authorities in New York, California, Washington, and Minnesota. Let's have a look at some pictures too. This is New York City. Protesters out on the streets after the announcement. And then later on Thursday night, we saw the antenna at the top of One World Trade Center in downtown Manhattan lit up in green in support of the Paris deal. Demonstrators also gathered outside the White House in Washington, D.C. Off we go to Washington now. Mike Hanna there to talk us through this. I mean, this is where I guess US politics is interesting, the federal versus the state level, and the state saying, well, we're going to carry on anyway.
Well, that is the case. You have got a direct division now between the states, a number of the states, and central government. Now, interestingly enough, within the last hour or so, the Secretary of State, Rex Tillerson, has said that the removal from the Paris Accord will not necessarily mean that the US will not continue to reduce its carbon emissions. He says that it has a proud record of doing so, as he puts it, and says the decision to leave the Paris Accord must be put in this perspective. But this is something of diplomatic speech, because Tillerson was one of those within the cabinet who was known to be strongly against leaving the Paris Accord. Now, we heard there as well about the massive states within the US going their own way on energy policy. So far, it's New York State, California, Washington State. Now, these three states alone are 1/5 of the US population and probably 1/5 of the gross national product. So it's an immensely powerful alliance that we see here, saying that they are going to continue to observe the Paris Accord, even though on a subnational basis. So there is that type of traction taking place within the United States. Interestingly, too, in the last few days, we've asked White House officials repeatedly whether or not President Trump believes that human activity impacts on climate change. Not one of them can tell us his position on it. Either they don't want to or they don't know. And Nancy Pelosi, a Californian senator, has come out very strongly as well, saying that President Trump lives in a fact-free universe, saying that he's made a decision about which he knows nothing, walking away from an accord that he simply doesn't understand, according to her.
Fascinating stuff. Mike Hanna's in Washington there. Thank you for that. Just a quick comment I want to read off the Facebook live stream at facebook.com/AJ Newsgrid, because I said just before we spoke to Mike how really the issue for Donald Trump was jobs. Tamela, I'm sorry if I'm pronouncing your name wrong, has said it's not jobs. American economists have provided reports showing we have more renewable energy jobs than fossil fuel jobs in the US. He is simply a denier. This is what we're going to be talking about. Again, we've got a guest to talk about this a little bit later on, but certainly that is the way that Donald Trump has justified it. Leah Harding, good evening.
Good evening.
You have been so busy today. I don't think we've been this busy since Covfefe, basically.
I know. Well, that's the effect Trump has on social media.
Exactly. Far more serious this time. Take us through it.
Well, hashtag Paris Agreement and withdraw are trending worldwide. With more than 1 million tweets so far, the center of the conversation is, of course, in the United States, with many cities protesting the plan to leave the deal. Governors of New York, California, and Washington State are protesting too. The trio, as we just heard, announced the formation of the U.S. Climate Alliance to uphold the Paris Climate Agreement. The Empire State Building and a bridge in New York City are glowing green, with Governor Andrew Cuomo saying that New York will still do its part for our children's future. Florida Governor Rick Scott has not been tweeting about the climate change per se, but earlier he did tweet this. He said he was warning Floridians about the start of hurricane season. There's also opposition in the tech industry. Elon Musk, he's the chief executive of Tesla and SpaceX. He tweeted saying that he's leaving the White House Advisory Council and said leaving Paris is not good for America or for the world. Disney's CEO, Facebook's founder, and the head of Apple all tweeted or went to Facebook to acknowledge their disappointment, many of them saying that this is bad for the environment. Mark Zuckerberg of Facebook says it's putting our children's future at risk. However, many people online still think that leaving the Paris Agreement was a good idea. Some from MAGA, or Make America Great Again movement, felt that way and shared these videos with us.
The Paris Climate Agreement is a promise that our president made to those who put him in office that he would pull out of this. And I am thankful he kept his word. I, for one, believe that the global warming and the climate change is a hoax that has been perpetrated upon the world, and those who have done it have become rich, and they would not be doing it had they not be getting the money for it.
President Trump's decision to pull out of the Paris Accords is more than just a game. This was bringing home the bacon for American workers and American businesses. The stock market rallied on the heels of this decision, and it's a message to the global elites that America is here to reassert its sovereignty, to put American interests first ahead of global interests. This was the message that we saw Trump on the campaign, and now we're seeing it in his presidency as well.
We'll give Alexander here the final word. He tweeted saying, whether you like Trump or not, you have to admit it's nice a president is actually living up to his promises. Now, we want to hear from you. We have a call out on our Twitter page at AJ English. And as always, you can connect with us with the hashtag AJ Newsgrid.
Thank you, Leah. So we're going to revisit now this main reason that Donald Trump wanted out of the Paris deal, at least what he says. In fact, here he is explaining it himself.
The Paris Climate Accord is simply the latest example of Washington entering into an agreement that disadvantages the United States to the exclusive benefit of other countries, leaving American workers, who I love, and taxpayers to absorb the cost in terms of lost jobs, lower wages, shuttered factories, and vastly diminished economic production.
So it's all about the jobs and the economy. And, you know, the decision did get some support. We can't ignore that. Leah's already talked about that. But look at this. America's largest coal mining firm, Peabody Energy, says it believed the accord would have substantially impacted the U.S. economy and increased electricity costs. Paul Bailey, president of the American Coalition for Clean Coal Electricity, said under the Paris deal, the Obama administration agreed to, quote, one of the most stringent goals of any country in the world. And U.S. Energy Secretary Rick Perry believes Donald Trump can drive economic growth and protect the environment at the same time. That coal industry comment is crucial because former coal mining towns in the U.S. did vote for Donald Trump. In fact, he specifically appealed to them, saying he would revive the dying coal industry. Rob Reynolds went to Mahanoy City in the heart of the Pennsylvania coal belt, where people are actually skeptical they'll see any new jobs.
Outside Mahanoy City stands what was once the biggest coal crushing plant in the U.S. Now it's a ruin, awaiting demolition, and an apt symbol of the rise and fall of the Pennsylvania coal country. Mahanoy City was built on coal and the thousands of jobs it brought. But now the streets are nearly empty, just like the deep underground mines that shut down long ago.
So this place used to be bustling, huh?
Bustling. There was a large restaurant, an apartment building over there they used to call the mansion.
74-year-old Charles Palulis was born and raised here. He has his doubts about President Donald Trump's promise of a coal mining renaissance.
Do you think Mahanoy City's coal industry is going to return?
Never. I don't think it'll ever come back.
18 years old and unemployed, Isaiah Kachula says he has coal mining in his blood.
My pap's dad died at like 56 because he died in a coal mine. He was working.
In an accident?
Yep. It came down on him, yep.
He'd be happy to work in the mines, and he hopes one day he can.
I'm around these streets every day. I see people just selling drugs, you know. Like, I'd be working in the coal mines, you know. I'd be working till I make that money.
The coal jobs dried up because of increased automation, competition from cheap natural gas, changes in market forces, and government policies that encourage the adoption of clean, renewable energy like solar and wind. Trump won the election in Pennsylvania and other states last year in part by appealing to mining communities like this one. Still, many people here realize that Trump's ditching of the Paris Climate Agreement won't wave a magic wand.
People are always wishful about the economy and about the job situation, but I think most all of them know that deep mining's not coming back.
Ironically, on the ridge looming over Manoy, new wind turbines spin away. Nationwide, 475,000 people work in renewable energy. Only 160,000 still work in coal. Rob Reynolds, Al Jazeera, Manoy City, Pennsylvania.
And this is a good point about jobs in the renewable sector. In fact, I've got a graphic here. This is admittedly from the Solar Foundation in the United States, so it's promoting its own sector. But look at some of the numbers here. 1 in 50 new US jobs were in the solar industry in the year 2016. And you can see this upward trend, which they're shown here. And again, like I was showing you last night with some graphics, the leaping is getting more and more, so it's increasing more. This is the one here which interests me, surpassing jobs in fossil fuels. The solar industry employs more than twice as many Americans as the entire coal industry and just as many Americans as the natural gas industry. We're going to talk about these sorts of issues with Chris Lefakis, who's the director of Moody's Analytics, a US firm providing analysis of current economic and financial events. He specialises in energy, so that's why we want to talk to you. Thank you for your time today. So the evidence seems, and our viewers have said this, and I've just backed it up with those numbers there, that the jobs argument doesn't necessarily wash here. I mean, there's plenty of jobs in renewable and other sectors. It doesn't need to go back to the coal sector, for example.
That's right. So if you look at solar and throw in wind, then the number of solar and wind jobs are triple the number of coal jobs. And it's really economics which killed coal in the United States. We used to have many coal-fired power plants back in their heyday. It was cheaper to build coal-fired power plants. It was filled with less uncertainty. Now, about 75% of the new power plant builds or more in the United States will use natural gas because these projects are cheap to build. There's not a lot of uncertainty with respect to how long it's going to take to build them. And there's less pressure from environmental regulations in terms of installing very expensive pollution scrubbers like there is with coal.
To go with Donald Trump's argument about this being good, putting America first and be good for the economy, is there any evidence, and I'm talking about the wider economy, not just the coal sector, is there any evidence to say that actually getting out of Paris will be helpful to the US economy?
Well, I think that the hope perhaps from the administration is that if the U.S. withdraws, then other countries will in fact rein in their commitments to move us towards renewable energy sources, and that would have an effect of boosting coal demand in countries like China or perhaps India, and that's what the U.S. relies on is demand from foreign demand for coal. So the U.S. coal industry has been in secular decline. It depends on exports to live, and I guess one thing that the administration hopes is that if we withdraw, then demand for U.S. coal will be greater. There's no evidence that would happen, though. So, I mean, we'll have to wait and see whether or not the U.S.'s withdrawal will actually boost global demand for U.S. coal. But given the early pronouncements of other states that they expect to stay in and comply with their obligations, there's a little bit of uncertainty with respect to whether or not that will occur.
Chris Lefakis, a pleasure talking to you. Thank you for your analysis. You at home are very vocal on this story. I'm absolutely not surprised about this, but getting great comments from all over the world. Ruth in Kenya on Facebook has said, I'm in Kenya, obviously. We're really feeling the effect of climate change. Low rainfall, too hot, food prices shoot up, staple maize flour not readily available. Climate change is not a myth. That shows you the knock-on effect. You saw Catherine Soy a little bit earlier in Kenya as well. Bobby from Australia says, hey, if Donald Trump, wants to reject the Paris Agreement. Let us, the rest of the world, show them that we are the bigger power and we don't need them. Dio from Uganda on WhatsApp says the US withdrawal hurts allies who will avoid future engagements on international issues because the US looks unreliable. Not finding a huge amount of comments in favour of the deal. You're certainly very vocal and we do appreciate that. Now, a reminder that there is a massive vault of content at aljazeera.com on Paris, climate change and global warming. There are 2 topic pages which I would suggest you look at. There's this one, which is the global warming one that has a lot of the current news articles there. And there is also Climate SOS that will link you through to Al Jazeera features and programs. Earthrise is there. We're going to be talking about Earthrise a little bit later. It's all there for you at aljazeera.com. The top stories, they're all related, of course, to Donald Trump's decision to leave the Paris Climate Accord. And what's trending as well, look, it's all there as well. World reacts to Trump's Paris Climate Accord withdrawal. Africa is not poor. We're stealing its wealth. Actually, that's been up there for a few days, but very relevant as well. Do go there, aljazeera.com. Have a look at what's trending. It's what you're looking at aljazeera.com. So here we are at the live wall and we've got the Chinese Premier meeting the Belgian Prime Minister in Brussels right now. It's a busy time, isn't it, for the Chinese Premier? But as we've been pointing out over and over again, this is how China is going to operate now. It is a good time for it to be stepping up and showing it is looking at climate change. There is other international news going on today, of course, and we're going to take a little break from the climate change story to check in with Mariam Namazi for that.
Yes, that's right. We've been following a developing story in the Philippines. ISIL claiming responsibility for the attack on a casino that killed at least 36 people. Crowds fled as the gunman stormed the casino in Manila on Friday evening, setting gambling tables alight before killing himself. Most of the dead died from suffocation. ISIL's news agency says its fighters in the Philippine capital were behind the attack. But the country's national security advisor says it was just a botched armed robbery and that the armed group is using it for propaganda. Jamila Alandogan has this update from Manila.
What we know is that at 2 a.m. early Friday morning, a lone gunman apparently barged into this hotel and started firing at those who were at the casino table. He then went to the 5th floor and, according to police, decided to burn himself. Now, a few hours later, the police chief basically made the claim that this is nothing but a case of a disgruntled gambler, and he said that there's no such thing as a terror attack, that he was very much dismissive and to a certain degree actually basically said that in fact that the case is closed. That has completely been turned around after, in fact, it was revealed that at least 36 people have suffocated to death in one of those rooms. Now, according to an executive of the hotel, he's also basically refuted allegations from the police, in fact, that this person is nothing but a disgruntled gambler. He also defended security personnel after allegations that they did not do enough to actually stop the gunman from actually barging in. So it's not unsure, it remains to be seen exactly where this investigation is going. What we know, though, is that apart from this hotel that is on lockdown around the area, everything seems back to normal, especially the security situation right in front of the Manila International Airport.
Afghan security forces have fired shots into the air to disperse anti-government protesters in the capital, Kabul. The demonstrators were trying to march towards the presidential palace. They want the government to resign for failing to protect them from attacks by armed groups. 90 people died when a truck bomb exploded in Kabul's diplomatic district on Wednesday. Well, now moving to South Sudan, the government says 15 children have died in a botched measles vaccination campaign.
The health ministry is blaming the deaths on human error. It says one syringe was used for all the children who died and doses of the vaccine weren't stored properly. The campaign is targeting more than 2 million children across the country. And the US says it's not trying to be provocative as it carries out a major military exercise with Japan off the Korean peninsula. 2 US aircraft carrier strike groups joined a Japanese helicopter destroyer in the Sea of Japan for 3 days of exercises. The naval drill is the first in that area in about 20 years. A US official says the exercises are intended to reassure allies and keep US forces ready for any crisis. That's it from me for now. Back to Kamal.
Thank you, Mariam. Just taking you live quickly to Berlin here. They're protesting. They're not happy about the hashtag total loser. Guess who they're talking about, I guess. People in Germany very vocal there outside the Brandenburg Gate as they protest Donald Trump's decision to leave the Paris Climate Accord. So this US decision, as I say, to pull out of the Paris Accord has been discussed at an international economic forum in Russia's second largest city of St. Petersburg. The Russian President Vladimir Putin and the Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi have attended a discussion panel where they were asked about their reaction to the withdrawal. Here is how Vladimir Putin responded.
This agreement is supposed to come into effect as of 2021, so we still have time. We're all constructive in things that we do.
Don't worry, be happy.
Rory Challens is live with us now from St. Petersburg. That was unexpected. Don't worry, be happy, says Vladimir Putin.
Yeah, it was the old Bobby McFerrin song. I think he was having fun up there. He likes these kind of forums. He likes basically being the centre of attention. And he likes it when he can explain himself in front of an international audience. Of course, Megyn Kelly, the famous former Fox News presenter, now at NBC, was the officiator in that panel discussion there. Essentially what he was saying about the climate change decision taken by Donald Trump was that let's calm down, let's not blow this out of proportion. The United States has taken a decision which he thinks it shouldn't have taken. He thinks that it was going basically against the interests of the United States, and that Donald Trump could have acted within the treaty rather than pulling out of it. But essentially, he wants everyone to calm down and to see what happens next.
Rory Challens, thank you for that. Rory's in St. Petersburg for us at that international economic conference. Facebook comment from Jason: Russia isn't going to take the lead. Russia is against the Paris Accord ultimately. It's a petrol state, it says. That's from Jason on Facebook Live. Right, let's go to Leah. Leah, you took us through US reaction before, international now.
Right. Well, we've seen all different landmarks in the U.S. light up and turn green, but that's happening all around the world, too. This is in Paris. It's the City Hall. It's from last night, glowing in green for support of the Paris Agreement. And you also have this. It's in Montreal City Hall in Quebec, Canada. People all around the world are showing their support for a global deal. A large chunk of the conversation, though, was inspired by French President Emmanuel Macron. Earlier in a speech, he said, quote, "We need to make our planet great again." Of course, a mock on Make America Great Again. That started its own hashtag. Then we had this user under that hashtag post this picture saying, "Clean up your mess, love Mother." We've been talking to many of you online through our call out on Twitter. This is what some of you from all around the world had to say.
Climate change is not an interest of one country. It is a common interest of every country in the world. So very simply and very obviously, climate change is not something we can do alone. It demands a lot of negotiations, consensus, and cooperation among the countries.
This is the only right choice to save our world. I'm a father of 2 beautiful children who has to take responsibility. So Donald Trump has to.
We've all seen the disaster and misery that super typhoons bring to the Philippines. So just imagine what would happen if global temperatures rise higher than the target set in the Paris Agreement. When I think of it, I imagine disasters greater than the things that we've seen ever before in our lives.
Climate change is the biggest threat to our planet, certainly in the lifetime of my two daughters. The environmental impacts are obvious, but I believe climate change will complicate the human challenges of our time as well. Terrorism, migration, internal conflict, poverty. So pulling out of the Paris Agreement, that's not American leadership, Mr. President. That's American abdication.
Now, India is one of the worst offenders when it comes to climate change, but it's also trying to lead the industry in renewable energy. Prime Minister Narendra Modi, he tweeted saying India must be an engine of growth as well as an example in climate-friendly development. We spoke to several of you in India about climate change. Take a listen.
Climate protection and living in harmony with nature is part of India's ethos. It's a matter of concern, and I heavily condemn the decision of Donald Trump. As an Indian, we are stand to protect our earth and climate.
India has been at the forefront of climate change policy. It has been advocating for a strong solar renewable sources of energy and use of energies like solar, nuclear. It has also set up International Solar Alliance with French President Philippe Hollande, as well as developing a robust nuclear program for clean energy.
Just this week, India canceled plans for a coal power station and is replacing it with a field of solar panels. India has also pledged to only sell electric cars by the year 2030. We'd love to hear from you. We have a call out on our Twitter page at AJ English. And as always, you can use the hashtag AJNewsGrid.
Thanks, Leah. Really quick WhatsApp comment. I reside in the US and I'm a Democrat. I believe climate change is a hoax. People came up with it to make money, and thank God for what Trump did. I can't wait to vote for him in the next elections. Nature will always be nature. Period. Fantastic comment. All right. So we've heard about the problems of climate change. What about the solutions? Coming up, we explore one innovative way people are conserving water in northern India, and we'll speak to the head of Al Jazeera's Earthrise environmental series. First, though, and perhaps more important today than any other, is a look at the weather. Welcome back. Special edition of the News Grid this Friday devoted entirely to climate change and the Paris Agreement. At this point, we want to look at the science of it all, because it's all well and good to talk about the Paris Accord, but really, what scientifically is it trying to combat? Here is Nick Clark with a one-minute explainer for AlJazeera.com.
You could argue that climate change is the single most important story of our times. So here it is in a nutshell. The Earth is wrapped in a blanket of naturally occurring greenhouse gases. CO2, carbon dioxide, is one of them. Without that blanket, the average temperature on this planet would be minus 17 degrees Celsius. Life would be next to impossible. But our duvet of greenhouse gases raises the temperature, keeping things at an average of 15 degrees Celsius. And that makes life pretty toasty on the whole. The problem is, by burning more fossil fuels, we're releasing more CO2 unnaturally. The system can't get rid of it. We're adding an extra layer to our already cozy blanket, making the planet warmer. Now, take a look at this graph. That line is the temperature of the Earth over the last 1,000 years. And look, it suddenly rockets upwards. Now look at this graph. That line is CO2 emissions over the last 1,000 years. And it suddenly increases too. Put one graph over the other, and you can see that that increase happens at exactly the same time, when the Industrial Revolution begins to kick in at the end of the 18th century. And that's when we started burning coal and fossil fuels. Is that cool? Not really.
So there you have it, the problem in black and white, literally. What about solutions, though? Well, I'm very pleased to have Amanda Burrell with me here in studio, executive producer of Al Jazeera's environmental program, Earthrise, and a very good friend of mine as well. It's lovely to have you here, Amanda. This was already, I mean, obviously this is what you do on Earthrise. You look at all these issues, but the issue of the protest movement against climate change or against Donald Trump's vision of climate change, this was already on your radar for this series of Earthrise, right?
Absolutely, yeah. We decided for the last programme of this series, which will go out in a few weeks' time, to look at the two big superpowers, US and China, and to look at what they were doing in the fight against climate change. And the story that we decided to focus on in America, in the US, was about people protesting and also taking action against Trump's environmental policies.
So has what's happened last night and today changed that at all, or has actually galvanised you even further, or the filmmakers even further?
Well, I mean, I think it's shown that we were definitely going in the right direction, and it shows even more that when the federal government is abrogating responsibility, that the responsibility needs to be taken elsewhere, whether it's the federal government, at the state government level, or at the grassroots level, or business level. It shows that the government, that people have to really take responsibility for climate change much more than before.
Okay, so let's just pause for a second, Amanda, because a couple of weeks ago, the water episode of this series of Earthrise was broadcast, wasn't it? And we've just cut down a little taster of it here. It's from a place called Ladakh, which is a region in Indian-administered Kashmir where the glaciers are melting, but they're getting innovative to solve water shortage problems. Have a quick look at this.
Have you noticed any changes, perhaps with the seasons or with the levels of water?
Nye long issue na pala ikala shenuk sonjing batbe te kaltes te khamata tsukshik chat inna chatpa yon khamata luzna kamri metkana chachok charchesan chachok tsukshik chana naksengati riul I phyang zokskunla kakspo chacheno.
What ice stupa does is, by using winter water, storing it in the form of ice, and it melts exactly when there is this acute shortage. Now that, suppose, is the mountain, and that bucket there is, say, the stream. From the lake or the stream, water comes in the pipe, which is underground, but here you can see, and there is pressure in the pipe. And then it comes like this. So you can see small droplets, which means water is exposed to the -20, -30 air, loses its heat, and freezes. There is no moving part, there is no electricity, just gravity. That's the beauty of it. Good. Next 40, 50 years, the people who will be running this world are now in schools and colleges. I want to engage them in these innovative ways to be sensitive towards the environment in the mountains, so that then the earth could be in safe hands.
What I love about that story, Amanda, is how ridiculously simple it is. I mean, climate change is a huge issue, and people, I mean, you've got lots of technology on your program as well, but that's so simple.
Absolutely, yes.
It's wonderful, isn't it? And in a remote place as well, I guess, is the interesting thing there, isn't it? It's not high-tech, it's just...
Yeah, well, it's local people and communities taking action when they need to. And it shows just how innovative and creative people can be when they're really up against it. And in fact, the other story in that programme is about training women in Jordan to be plumbers, which is a very simple approach to what is actually a really large problem in Jordan, a country which is facing the worst drought for 900 years and where so much water is lost through leaking pipes. Then training women to be plumbers themselves can make a real difference and can save enough water for, I think it's 2.6 million people annually, just by teaching people how to stop leaks.
So is this something we need to learn from? If I'm getting a bit big and holistic here, but something we need to learn from, that it's not, well, it's a big problem, but every little bit counts, right? And that you don't need to be super high-tech, you don't need to be full of money, and you can take I think you called it the grassroots approach.
Absolutely. I think it is, obviously what the ideal is when you get government and grassroots working from both ends and meeting in the middle somehow. But it is those, the small scale, often simple projects which have the capacity to make a real difference. So Sonam, for example, in the Ladakh film that we just looked at, he started off with one stupa. He's done the trial and it's working. And his vision is he's now got more than one stupa, but his vision is to have a whole sort of army of stupas across his part of the Himalayas. Now, if you take that solution and you put it not only across the whole of the Himalayas, but across other mountain ranges, which are also facing the terrible problem of glacial melt, then you've got a solution which can make a real impact globally.
Fantastic. Nice to have some positive news. Lovely to see you, Amanda.
Thank you very
for
much.
coming in. So we want to finish this news grid with a look at what we've been doing over the years to bring you the stories of climate change. You've heard from Amanda there in Earthrise, which has been going for 9 seasons, and they've had a real focus on this. But, our correspondents have been to the ends of the earth, in some cases quite literally, to report on how climate change is affecting people everywhere. Here are some of the best of them. Just want to leave you with this. It's a Facebook message which came in from Luis quite early in the show, but I've saved it for the end. Our planet is our home, so if we do not care, who should do it? And that's a really good point. Don't want to get too preachy here, but it's a good point, isn't it? That'll do it for this news grid. Not often we devote an entire show to one topic, but sometimes we think it's just that important. Here's how you get in touch with us. The hashtag is AJ Newsgrid on whichever platform you're using, be it Twitter at AJ English, where the call-outs go, looking for your responses at facebook.com/AJ Newsgrid, the live stream. On WhatsApp, we are +974 501 11149. Not just your questions and comments. Remember, if you're going to send a video or pictures of a story we're covering, please do it. We want to hear from you. The News Grid returns right back here in Studio 14 at Al Jazeera at 1500 hours GMT on Saturday.
We have the chance in the show to dig a little deeper, the time to be able to explore. We provide a platform for guests to debate the issues that matter the most to them. Inside Story at this time on Al Jazeera.
June on Al Jazeera.
6 days that left a permanent mark on the Middle East. 50 years on, we examine the context and consequences of the 1967 war in June.
Following his victory in France's presidential election, how will Emmanuel Macron's young party fare in the parliamentary vote?
3 years after the Ebola outbreak in West Africa, Talk to Al Jazeera meets people in Liberia and asks them, what's changed?
With a snap election called, will Theresa May's Conservative Party gain a strong mandate to lead the upcoming Brexit negotiations?
And examining the lifeblood of modern-day capitalism, Debt Machine provides an understanding of the global economy.
June on Al Jazeera.
In India, 5 million children have genius-level IQs, but most live in poverty and go undiscovered. 101 East meets two child geniuses fighting for their chance to shine. At this time on Al Jazeera.
We understand the difference